Behind the smooth voice and timeless hit Me and Mrs. Jones, Billy Paul carried a burden few ever knew about. For decades, fans saw the elegance, the success, the chart-topping fame. But what was the secret he took with him to the grave? Was it tied to the lawsuits that followed his biggest song, the controversy over whether he was black enough, or a painful truth about his health and personal life that never made headlines? As the spotlight faded, Billy Paul's story took a far darker turn than anyone expected. Why did he choose silence? And how did that silence shape the man behind the music? Tonight, we look beyond the hit record and into the hidden life and tragic ending of a singer the world thought it knew. The smooth voice that stood out. Billy Paul was raised in North Philadelphia, in a home where music was a constant presence. His passion began early, shaped largely by his mother's ever-growing record collection. Looking back, he once said, "That's how I really got indoctrinated into music. My mother was always collecting records, and she would buy everything from jazz at Philharmonic Hall to Nat King Cole." Those records became his first classroom. As a boy, Paul sang along obsessively, studying the voices that filled the room. While he admired Nat King Cole, he was determined not to become a copy of anyone. "I always wanted to go my own way," he explained, even as he gravitated towards singers whose smoothness and control captivated him. He was drawn to voices like Dinah Washington, Sarah Vaughan, and especially Ella Fitzgerald, whom he openly adored. "I loved Ella Fitzgerald," he said. "They all had a style, a silkiness about them. I wanted to sing silky, like butter, mellow." Paul also counted Nina Simone among his favorites, along with Johnny Mathis, Jesse Belvin, whom he remembered as Mr. Easy, and Sam Cooke. Yet it was the women who left the deepest mark. Explaining why, Paul once said, "I think the reason behind that is because of my high range. The male singers who had the same range I didn't do much for me. But put on Nina Simone, Carmen McRae, or Nancy Wilson, and I'd be in seventh heaven." To him, female vocalists simply did more with their voices. Above all, Billie Holiday stood apart. Paul called her a big influence, crediting her emotional honesty and phrasing as formative to his own approach. From those early listening sessions, he began shaping a sound that blended jazz sensitivity, R&B warmth, and pop accessibility. Billy Paul began singing professionally at just 11 years old, appearing on Philadelphia's local radio station WPEN. Recognizing his natural talent, his mother insisted he receive proper vocal training, enrolling him at the West Philadelphia Music School and later the Granoff School of Music. Paul later reflected on how crucial that support was. "It was something my mum would say I needed, holding my notes, delivering my notes. It gave me a surety because my mother was 100% behind me." That foundation, he believed, helped shape the voice that would define his career. "All my life I wanted to sound like myself. I never wanted to sound like anybody else." That individuality came from an unusual place. Paul once explained that he originally dreamed of being a saxophone player, and he carried that mindset into his singing. "I took my uniqueness and treated it like a horn," he said, a philosophy that helped create his smooth, fluid style, controlled, expressive, and unmistakably his own. By 16, Paul was already performing at major venues. One of the most formative moments of his life came at Club Harlem in Philadelphia, where he shared the bill with jazz legend Charlie Parker. Paul spent a week in Parker's presence shortly before the icon's death, absorbing lessons he said would have taken years to learn elsewhere. "Bird told me if I kept struggling, I'd go a long way," Paul recalled. "I've never forgotten his words." As his reputation grew, Paul began performing at clubs and college campuses across the country. To avoid confusion with other musicians named Paul Williams, he adopted the stage name Billy Paul. The change came through his manager, Jules Malvin, whom Paul described as a father figure. "He took me up to the Apollo, and I warmed the Apollo for 6 weeks," Paul remembered. That's where he gave me the name Billy Paul. I didn't question it. From that moment on, the name and the voice behind it began carving out a lasting place in soul music history. First recordings. In 1952, Billy Paul traveled to New York City and took his first serious step into the recording industry. Still a teenager, he entered the studio with Jubilee Records, backed by jazz heavyweights Tad Dameron on piano and Jackie Davis on Hammond organ. That April, he released his debut single, Why Am I?, paired with That's Why I Dream, as the B-side, both written by Bernard Sachs and B. Sidney Zeff. The trade press took notice. Billboard praised Why Am I as expressive warbling of a moody ballad by the label's new 16-year-old chanter, while noting that That's Why I Dream benefited from the gentle support of piano and organ in a slow-paced etching of a romantic number. For a newcomer barely out of adolescence, it was an encouraging reception. 2 months later, Paul returned with a second release, this time recording with the Buddy Lucas Orchestra. The single You Didn't Know, backed with The Stars Are Mine, again earned favorable reviews. Billboard called his performance an impressive bow and described the record as a good disc, though they noted the B-side was more subdued and less immediately exciting. Jubilee Records leaned into the momentum, even taking out a Billboard advertisement ahead of the annual NAMM show, boldly promoting their young singer with the line, "He's new, he's hot." Still, despite the critical encouragement and label support, none of Billy Paul's early singles managed to break onto the charts. Army years and resumption of professional career. Billy Paul's career took an unexpected detour when he was drafted into the U.S. Armed Services. He entered in 1957 and was stationed in Germany alongside Elvis Presley and Gary Crosby, the son of Bing Crosby. Paul later remembered the moment with humor and clarity. "We were in Germany and we said we're going to start a band, so we didn't have to do any hard work in the service." He and Gary Crosby formed the Jazz Blues Symphony Band, though Elvis declined to join, choosing instead to drive a Jeep for Colonel Parker. "He wanted to get away from music for a while," Paul said. The band went on to tour across Germany and became a proving ground for future stars like Cedar Walton and Eddie Harris. Paul made the most of military life musically. Alongside members of the 7th Army Band, including Don Ellis, Leo Wright, and Ron Anthony, he continued to perform, knowing his real career would resume once he returned to civilian life. "I sang in the service. I sang with a jazz band," he recalled. "So when I came out, I sang jazz, going to clubs and so forth." The Army also kept another passion alive: boxing. Growing up around boxers in his neighborhood, Paul continued training during his service. In a 2012 interview, he laughed about sparring stories with Miles Davis, until one hard hit made him decide, "No, I'm going to sing." After his discharge, Paul formed a jazz trio with hard bop pianist Sam Dockery and bassist Buster Williams. In 1959, he signed with New Dawn Records and released Ebony Woman, backed with You'll Go to Hell. A year later, he recorded There's a Small Hotel and I'm Always a Brother. None of these early singles charted, but Paul would revisit and re-record some of them later, convinced the material still had life. Around the same time, he briefly filled in with the Blue Notes alongside Harold Melvin, a stint he remembered with a laugh. "I didn't want to dance, so Harold Melvin fired me." He then spent 6 months performing with the Flamingos, further sharpening his stage experience. It was during this period that Paul formed a deep, lifelong bond with Marvin Gaye, as both were filling in with various groups, Paul with the Blue Notes and Gaye with the Moonglows. Paul later spoke about that friendship with profound emotion. "We were like brothers. I think about Marvin every day. The love I have for this man is unbelievable." Their connection extended beyond music. Gaye even looked after Paul's family when he was on the road. "Sometimes," Paul said, "I wake up and hope it was a dream. But it's real. It's real. Me and Mrs. Jones, and international fame." With each new release, the sound surrounding Billy Paul grew more focused and confident, building towards something unmistakable. In 1972, that evolution reached its peak with the album 360 Degrees of Billy Paul and its signature track, Me and Mrs. Jones. Both the record and the single were embraced by critics and audiences alike, marking a true breakthrough and a defining turning point in Paul's career. Me and Mrs. Jones soared to #1 for the final 3 weeks of 1972, selling more than 2 million copies and earning platinum status. The song didn't just dominate the US, it broke internationally, climbing into the top 20 in the UK and peaking at #12 in early 1973. The single went on to win Paul a Grammy Award, cementing its place as a soul classic. Looking back, Paul never forgot the shock of that moment. "Oh man, I was up against Ray Charles, Curtis Mayfield, Isaac Hayes," he recalled. "When I saw Ringo Starr call my name, I said, oh, yeah. The most sobering thing is to have a #1 record across the whole entire world in all languages. It's a masterpiece. It's a classic. Over the years, the song's legacy only grew. It was covered repeatedly, most famously by the Dramatics in 1974, Freddie Jackson in 1992, and Michael Bublé in 2007, each version reaffirming the song's timeless emotional pull. The success also marked a milestone for Philadelphia International Records, as Me and Mrs. Jones became the label's first #1 hit. At the same time, PIR was thriving with artists like the OJs and Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, creating an atmosphere Paul would always cherish. "It was like a family full of music," he said. "Music round the clock." Am I black enough controversy? The momentum from Me and Mrs. Jones proved difficult to sustain. Its follow-up, Am I Black Enough for You, landed with far less impact, largely because its unapologetic Black Power message made mainstream radio uncomfortable. Releasing such a politically charged song immediately after a crossover romantic smash sparked controversy almost instantly, and Paul knew it would. In a 1977 interview, Billy Paul made it clear he had opposed the decision from the start. "The biggest mistake was releasing Am I Black Enough for You straight after Mrs. Jones," he said. People weren't ready for that kind of song. They were looking for a sequel, or at least something that wasn't provocative. Paul believed the timing cost him dearly, even suggesting that with a different choice, I may have reached the heights of Michael Jackson. Years later, his view softened. Paul acknowledged the song came from a place of honesty and courage, even if it clashed with expectations. He reflected that the idea came from within the label's leadership, often pointing to Clive Davis, who later said he actually opposed releasing it as a single. Still, Davis praised it as an all-time great record, all-time great performance. Paul admitted he carried anger for years, feeling the song derailed his career before finally accepting that it had simply arrived ahead of its time. "I feel like I let the song down when I went into my darkness," he said. "I abandoned it." Despite the single's struggle, the album 360 Degrees of Billy Paul remained a success, reaching #1 on the Billboard Soul chart and #17 on the pop chart. At the time, there was little reason to believe Paul couldn't build on that momentum. In 1973, while still promoting the album, he spoke confidently about new material and future singles, convinced another hit was within reach. Yet tracks like Brown Baby and I'm Just a Prisoner were never released in the US, quietly stalling that next chapter. The impact of Me and Mrs. Jones was so enormous that earlier albums, Feeling Good at the Cadillac Club and Ebony Woman, were reissued in 1973 with new cover art to meet renewed demand. While the reissues drew interest from new fans, only Ebony Woman briefly returned to the charts. Jesse Jackson controversy. The album When Love Is New followed a path similar to its predecessor, and met a similar fate. Released in December 1975, it struggled to break through on the pop side, peaking at #139 on the Billboard Pop Albums chart, though it performed better on the soul chart, reaching #17. The record produced two singles, Let's Make a Baby, which became Billy Paul's last entry on the pop singles chart at number 83, while also hitting number 18 on the soul chart and number 30 in the UK, and People Power, which reached number 82 on the soul chart and found unexpected success on dance floors, climbing to number 14 on the US dance chart. But Let's Make a Baby quickly became a lightning rod. Critics accused it of being obscene or morally corrosive, and calls emerged to ban or censor the song. The backlash was led publicly by Jesse Jackson and his organization Operation Push, which also targeted other popular songs of the era. The campaign played out station by station with no unified ban. Some broadcasters continued airing the track but avoided announcing its title, while others went as far as altering the lyrics. Behind the scenes, however, several black radio DJs expressed frustration with the controversy. Speaking anonymously, they dismissed it as a performative crusade, accusing Jackson of hypocrisy and selective outrage. They pointed out that similarly suggestive songs by artists supportive of Operation Push escaped scrutiny, fueling the belief that the campaign was more about visibility than principle. Jackson publicly rejected those accusations, insisting the movement was aimed at records, not artists, and framed the effort as a stand against lyrics he felt degraded human sexuality rather than celebrating love or romance. He emphasized that any lyric changes were made independently by radio stations and not at Billy Paul's request. Rather than cooling tensions, the controversy only intensified with Paul's next release, Let 'Em In, issued in late 1976. The title track was a radical reinterpretation of Let 'Em In, transforming the original's subtle references into an explicit civil rights statement. While Paul McCartney kept his lyrics ambiguous, Billy Paul's version openly named fallen leaders, including Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., John and Robert Kennedy, Medgar Evers, Elijah Muhammad, and Louis Armstrong, and wove in powerful excerpts from speeches by Malcolm X and King. Me and Mrs. Jones lawsuits. In 2000, Nike launched a high-profile television campaign built around Olympic track star Marion Jones, who at the time was the public face of Team USA heading into the Sydney Summer Games. The commercial, titled Mrs. Jones, portrayed the athlete as a shadowy DJ figure speaking about education and the fight for fair pay for women in sports. Set beneath the visuals was Billy Paul's unmistakable studio recording of Me and Mrs. Jones. When Paul saw the ad, he was stunned. He had never been asked for permission to use the song. He quickly contacted a lawyer who filed a federal lawsuit in Los Angeles against Nike and its advertising agency, Whedon plus Kennedy. Paul sought $1 million in damages, arguing that the company had deprived him of proper licensing fees by using the song without authorization. An agency spokesperson later admitted the oversight, calling the decision to air the commercial without clearance a very stupid mistake. That lawsuit opened the door to another long-simmering dispute. Shortly afterward, Paul turned his attention to his former record label, claiming he had not received a royalty accounting statement for Me and Mrs. Jones in nearly 3 decades. He filed suit against Philadelphia International Records publishing arm and its associated parties, including Sony Music Entertainment, demanding close to $500,000 in unpaid royalties. During a 2003 federal court trial in Los Angeles, the label's legal team pushed back hard. Their attorney argued that Paul was owed far less, roughly $27,000, and claimed that while the company had mishandled some foreign royalty collections, Paul himself still owed more than $300,000 in recording and production costs tied to the 10 albums he made for the label between 1971 and 1980. In the end, the jury needed less than an hour to reach a verdict, and it landed firmly in Billy Paul's favor. They ruled that he owed nothing to the company and instead awarded him $500,000 in unpaid royalties tied to his recording of Me and Mrs. Jones. Through a statement released by his attorney, Paul said, "I'm so glad my path to justice has finally come to an end. I've been waiting years to be paid for my recordings." Seymour Strauss, who testified on Paul's behalf, was blunt in his assessment. There is no question that Billy Paul's royalties had been improperly calculated for many years. Jay Berger of the Artists' Rights Enforcement Corporation called the ruling a landmark moment, saying it reinforced the rights of artists signed to small production companies to receive their fair share when major labels distribute their work. Chuck Rubin, president of Artists' Rights, echoed that sentiment, declaring that producers would no longer be able to walk away with artists' royalties unchecked. Paul's attorney, Stephen Ames Brown, described the outcome as decisive. "It was a stunning victory for Billy," he said, noting that the jury awarded even more than they had requested. "The years of deception and excuses are over, and Billy Paul will now enjoy the fruits of his talents. Los Angeles juries have no patience for deadbeat record companies." Brown added pointedly that Paul had once been close friends with Kenny Gamble, raising uncomfortable questions about how other artists might have been treated. Paul's wife and manager, Blanche Williams, went further, calling the verdict a moral victory. She accused Gamble, Leon Huff, and Sony Music Entertainment of arrogance and creative bookkeeping, saying the jury was visibly angered by what it learned in court. She argued the ruling opened the door for countless other artists whose royalties had been underreported to finally seek justice. "The chickens came home to roost," she said. "This is just the beginning." On the other side, Gamble and Huff's attorney downplayed the decision, insisting it was merely an accounting dispute and denying any intentional wrongdoing. Even so, the case quickly became a reference point for other artists, including members of the OJs and Archie Bell of Archie Bell and the Drells, who would go on to file similar lawsuits. For Billy Paul, the verdict was more than a legal win. It was long overdue validation that his voice, his work, and his legacy finally carried the weight they always deserved. Feature film. In 2009, a deeply personal chapter of Billy Paul's life reached the screen with the release of the biographical documentary Am I Black Enough for You?, directed by Swedish filmmaker Goran Hugo Olsson. The film drew thoughtful praise from critics, including Uncut Magazine, which awarded it 3 stars and noted that Olsson modeled the project on Bruce Weber's Let's Get Lost, the iconic portrait of jazz trumpeter Chet Baker. While acknowledging that Paul was no fallen demi-genius in the Baker mold, the review described him as an engaging and articulate subject whose life story stretched from sharing stages with Charlie Parker to confronting racial prejudice, addiction, and recovery. The film framed Paul's career as emblematic of the broader struggles of Black America across the second half of the 20th century. Success and setbacks intertwined, brilliance shadowed by systemic barriers. It also highlighted his descent into cocaine addiction and eventual recovery, a journey he shared closely with his wife, who appeared throughout the documentary as a spirited and steadfast presence. The magazine likened the couple to a jazzy Derby and Joan, bound together by music, survival, and mutual resolve. Paul later explained that his decision to participate came from a place of urgency and honesty. "I'm not getting any younger," he said, "and I wanted to express some things that might have been hidden." He saw the documentary as a chance to open his heart, to speak openly about his highs and lows, and to confront parts of himself he had kept buried. The process, he said, felt natural. The European film crew followed him around the world, yet he soon forgot the camera was even there. Trust was central to the experience. Paul emphasized that the filmmakers were genuine fans who understood his music and respected his story, especially given the film's strong reception in Sweden. That trust mirrored the foundation of his marriage, and it allowed the documentary to become deeply personal rather than performative. By the end, Paul felt changed by the experience. "I am now at peace with myself," he reflected. "This movie has done a lot for me. It helped me get rid of a lot of demons." Later activity. In 2011, Billy Paul continued to reach across generations and borders when he appeared on an album by French singer Chimène Badi, recording a duet on the Motown classic Ain't No Mountain High Enough. The collaboration was a reminder that Paul's voice, warm, elegant, and emotionally precise, still carried international weight decades after his biggest hit. That same year also marked the 40th anniversary of Philadelphia International Records, prompting renewed attention to its legacy. In the UK, Big Break Records began remastering and reissuing many albums from the label's catalog, including Paul's, adding fresh liner notes, interviews, and bonus tracks. In the United States, Legacy Recordings released Golden Gate Groove, The Sound of Philadelphia, live in San Francisco, 1973, a historic label showcase recorded at the Fairmont Hotel on June 27, 1973. Backed by the powerhouse MFSB Orchestra, 35 musicians strong, Paul delivered extended soulful performances of East and Me and Mrs. Jones, both of which appeared on the album. The release was warmly received, earning 4.5 out of 5 stars from AllMusic. Over the years, Paul's achievements were widely recognized. Beyond his Grammy Award for Me and Mrs. Jones, he received multiple Ebby Awards from Ebony magazine readers, an American Music Award, an NAACP Image Award, and numerous proclamations and ceremonial keys from cities across the United States. His influence was also acknowledged by later generations of musicians. In 2010, Questlove compared Paul to Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder, calling him one of the criminally unmentioned proprietors of socially conscious post-revolution 60s civil rights music. Billy Paul passed away on April 24, 2016, at his home in the Blackwood section of Gloucester Township, New Jersey. He was 81 years old, and the cause was pancreatic cancer. He was laid to rest at West Laurel Cemetery in Bala Cynwyd, Pennsylvania, near fellow Philadelphia international artist Teddy Pendergrass. His voice may have been silenced, but his legacy, equal parts elegance, courage, and soul, continues to resonate.